All right, Travis, thank you for being on the show today, my friend. How you doing?
Oh, not too bad, dude. I'm not too bad. Thanks for having me, Brett. I appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited. And you've got a really interesting story, right? You kind of grew up in a bit of a bubble. You studied kindergarten all the way through college at the same ministry campus, which I think is really interesting, and married your high school sweetheart, started in door-to-door sales, and then eventually you decided to start a podcast. And fast forward to today, you've interviewed the likes of Shaquille O'Neal, Grant Cardone, Ed Milet, so many other A-listers. You founded Guestio, which helps people book similar A-level guests. But I think that what people really want to know is that what was it like being in a traveling men's gospel quartet?
Uh, that's what everybody's dying to know.
I
Yeah.
think so. I think that's probably the question on most people's minds right now.
Oh man, it was. I mean, at the time, I had a good time. At the end of it, I was pretty much over it because you go hard in those vans, dude. Like we were in a 10-passenger van. It's basically the college's number one way of like recruiting new students. They send out these tour groups to churches all summer, and then we like our kind of core job is to connect with the youth and the church and collect college applications and things like that. So it's a big college promo tour. But yeah, I was sang in a gospel quartet, and then I think we were gone for like 84 days, and we sang in like 68 churches in that time period. Like we only had one day off
Dude, you
every
guys were
week.
you guys
So
were getting after it.
oh yeah, dude. Like Monday was the only day that we didn't sing somewhere. So churches would adjust their midweek schedule to have us come in. We would do youth activities on the weekends, and obviously Sunday was always packed. And sometimes we would hit a church in the morning and sing a set of 8 to 12 songs, and then we'd drive somewhere else and hit a different church that night. And so yeah, it was a couple churches every Sunday, nothing Monday, but then Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night, we were singing, we were knocking doors, we were soloing, we were doing something.
Dude, that's wild.
So by the
That
end of the
is
summer,
wild.
it was like I was pretty much over it. You know what I mean? It was like, it's the same people in the tiny van like that. You start getting on each other's nerves and stuff, but there's still some good memories in there. It was, good time.
Yeah, for sure. I could see how it'd be fun, but also, how it could be like a one and done type deal.
Yeah, that's
I,
how it was
I,
for me.
I had a similar one and done summer in my early 20s where I worked at SeaWorld. I was an educator for the exhibits, and I would stand there with my little kind of Britney Spears headset microphone on and talk about the various aquatic animals. And
Nice.
once you've done the same 15-minute spiel on sea lions for the 500th time, you're like, I'm good. Like, I don't need to do this again next summer. let's
Yeah, yeah,
let's go let's go be a waiter or something. But
yeah. Right.
so anyway, listen, like I said, you have interviewed Rob Dyrdek, Ed Milet, tops of the top in their professions. And I'm just curious, like, these are really insightful conversations. You obviously do a lot of preparation for them. If I were to ask you about the art of conversation, what do you think the art of conversation entails?
It's a good question, man. In terms of podcast interviews, preparation has a lot to do with it. But if we're talking about just like art of conversation in general for most people in day to day life, there's still some aspects that are going to be the same, but obviously the research thing is kind of out the window. If you just randomly find yourself in a conversation with somebody interesting on the street somewhere in a Starbucks line or in the airport or whatever, you obviously don't know who they are and didn't do prep ahead of time to come up with interesting questions.
Right. And
Um,
and if you did, that's a little scary.
yeah, also, yeah, very strange and super creepy. But the principles are kind of, remain the same. First of all, ask questions, listen more than you speak, like a lot more, don't take up too much of the time talking, ask a lot of good questions. Don't talk too much. Let them answer the questions, let them talk about themselves, dig in deeper, ask more questions about them as they continue to give you more things. But then even like beyond that, man, it's a lot of it too. What I found is that it's about increasing trust with people and allowing people to be comfortable talking to you or giving you information or just being around you. And I think a lot of that has to do with tonality and body language and, things like that. Like, it's not even really about like the quote unquote conversation, like the words that you're saying, as much as it is how you're saying them, how you're coming across, and if people will trust you at the end of the day. And some of that can't be faked. You know what I mean? Like, if you're an inherently untrustworthy person, then you're probably going to be giving off those vibes, unless you're going to try to be really inauthentic to who you actually are, which maybe feels authentic to you because of how much of a dishonest person you are. But um, I I've been thinking about this a lot more lately, which is why I'm struggling to put the words together, because I've just now been kind of thinking through a lot of these things more recently, as people have been asking me more questions about interviewing, and especially as I've been like having conversations with people who get interviewed a lot, and they'll compliment the interview afterwards. And some of them I didn't prep as much, like near as much as I wanted to prep for, but we'll still talk for 90 minutes and still have a great conversation. And I have to think that that is part of it, because that's one of the compliments that I get, is that like that I was easy to talk to, and I've been trying to define what that means lately, as I guess my broader point. It's like, and it's not super helpful just to be like, oh yeah, well, Travis is easy to talk to, but I'm not. So where do we go from here? You know what I mean? Because I
Right.
wasn't either for a long time, I'm sure, as well. It's just that after doing hundreds of these conversations, I think you just kind of naturally sink into a rhythm. So tonality and body language matter a lot in those contexts. I try not to come across strong. I try to mirror and match a lot. I try to match people's energy, match people's vibes, and then take it down a little bit. So like, if they're a really high energy, I try to be more high energy, but I take it down a little bit. If they're like really even keeled, I match their even keeledness, but I take it down just a little bit. So I come across like right around where they are, and then relax a little bit more than even they are relaxed. And I think people pick up on those things. And then like I said, the tonality is very natural for me. Like, the word that a lot of people, my close friends, would use to describe me would be chill. And I think that comes across in the conversations. I think that comes across in my demeanor. And I think that makes it to where people are more willing to share information with me. But frankly, a lot of it, man, is just like what I said at the very beginning. It's ask good questions and shut up. Just stop talking all the time. Don't feel like you got to interject all the time. If like, you've done a really great job so far, even Brett, like when you asked me a question and I sat there and I kind of sighed and I looked around, and like, you can tell I'm thinking. A lot of people don't have the ability to make it through that awkward silence, and they'll interrupt my thought pattern with another question. And it's like, no, I wasn't a bad question. I'm just genuinely trying to think of an answer that is going to be sufficient for the question that you asked. But if you interrupt me with another question, then not only do I not answer that first question fully, but now I'm like knocked off track of what I was thinking about on how to answer that question more effectively. And now I got to think about the new question that you're
Right.
asking me. And so, a lot of people kind of shoot themselves in the foot to see if they can walk when they're in those conversations. And yes, a lot of it, man, is just learn to ask good questions and then learn to shut up. I'm much more of like a third party observer in conversation than I think most people realize that I am. And I think that's been really helpful.
Yeah, for sure. I think you touched on a lot of really solid points there, right? To ask the good question, shut up and listen, and don't feel the need to step on someone mid statement or ask another question while they're still talking. I think so often all of us, it's just kind of our natural human inclination that we have a thought while someone else is speaking, and we want to jump in mid statement and we want to get involved. But really, the greatest gift that I think you can give anyone is just to let them finish and fully listen to somebody while they're speaking. And I
Yeah.
think they feel that. I think people really do feel it when you're completely focused on their message. And I think inherently that makes them want to share more. So I just think the art of listening is something that we can all work on a daily basis, fully listening to someone. And then, like you said,
Yeah.
get a little comfortable with silence. Silence is a really powerful tool to be able to use within conversation. And if you ask someone a question and they take a second or two to think about the answer, that's not a bad thing. That
Yeah.
just means that they're taking time to give you a thoughtful response. I think I was using Insight Timer to meditate yesterday, and I think how those little quotes come up. I don't know if you use Insight Timer, but the quote that came up yesterday was something by Cicero, who I guess is some ancient philosopher, and he says that the art of conversation is really about the art of silence, and I think that there's really there's a lot of truth there.
Yeah, pretty much wraps it up.
Yeah,
Now, and
yeah,
it's a little bit different if you have if you are an interviewer and it's your podcast, it's your show, and maybe the host is long-winded or the guest is long-winded, and they're
sure,
answering a question that's like going on for 12 minutes, and you wanted to only talk about this for a couple of minutes because you wanted to get to another part of the conversation, and you have a bigger picture for where you're trying to go with the preparation shit. That's a little bit different. Like
sure,
I tend I'll interrupt people if they're like just kind of word vomiting,
right,
maybe saying the same thing over and over again, or maybe they're just going a completely opposite direction of the way that I wanted to go. Because at the end of the day, like if it's your show, it's your show, and you reserve the right to be able to interrupt and change and pivot the conversation and get what you want to get out of the guest. But it's also your job to make sure that that doesn't happen as much, and ask questions in a way that will prompt people to answer it in a shorter period of time if they're more long-winded. So there's some things that you can do when you're forming the questions, but also some people are just they're wordy and they want to talk a lot. So it's okay just to be like, hey, let me interrupt you for just 1 second. There was something that you said I want to make sure we touch on before we head in this other direction. You said X. What did you mean by when you said that? Like you can come in and interrupt the conversation if you only got 30 minutes. They're talking for, you know what I mean? So don't, in a podcast interview is a little bit different than it would be in a
sure.
real life conversation.
For sure. You're not going to be in like the airport terminal and be like, hey, listen, could you actually just hold on
Yeah,
for a
I would
second?
actually really like to take the conversation in a different direction. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
But I agree on the podcast. And I think that's where preparation can come into play as well. If you
yeah,
can take the time to maybe listen to an episode or two that the other person has been on, you might actually get a feel for kind of where they kind of run on and on and on a specific topic. And you can kind of be ready for that circumstance on your show and be able to kind of, point them in a different direction and keep them
absolutely.
from using up, 15 of their 45 minutes on one topic that, the audience is really not that interested in.
Right.
So listen, I did a pretty deep dive on your content before this interview, and I think it's really good, insightful stuff. And there was one thing that you said that I want to touch on a little bit, and you spoke about just the importance of building an army of true fans. And I was curious if you could just kind of touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, man. When I first started in the space, I was thinking very shallow. I was thinking like, I want to get sponsors and do podcasting and that's it. I don't want to think about anything else. And then I started doing more research and deep diving more on like people who had built solid audiences and what that meant for them. And I had these like really local general examples of people that I knew who had built, good audiences. They're not massive, but they're really good. You know what I'm saying? So like, people who are getting, they're getting 30 to 40,000 downloads an episode on their podcast. Their YouTube channel has 150,000 subscribers. They have 100,000 person email list. Blog traffic is 7 figures a month. It's like, so they're not Cristiano Ronaldo, but they have an audience. They have
Sure.
true fans. And I started looking at like their business models, just like, it's crazy that whatever they launch, it's immediately successful to a relative degree. Like there's a certain level of success that they will inherently obtain right off the bat, just because they have an army of people that are willing to give them a shot because they trust everything that they put together, that it's going to be good. And I watched it happen in real time where I knew people that like, a friend launched a Kickstarter campaign for a handheld tripod for vloggers. And they've set the goal at $100,000. Like they basically like, formulated the product. They came up with a couple of them, but it was costing them like $3,000 every time they wanted to make a
Okay.
new kind of, prototype, because there was no mold in the manufacturing process. So in order to go build that mold and actually be able to order to the point where they could bring their cost down to less than $100, so they could sell it for $100 and still make a profit, they needed about $100,000. So they launched a Kickstarter campaign to raise money for this thing. Within 24 hours, they raised over $100,000. By the end of the campaign, which was 30 days, they did over $400,000 in pre-orders for this stupid tripod that you can hold in your hand for vloggers. And I asked the guy, I was like, hey man, how many people do you think just ordered one? He's like, I don't know the real number, but I had so many people reach out that were just like, I don't even own a DSLR. I don't even own a camera. I'm never going to use this, but I bought 3 of them, just because like I want to support you in this project that you're working on because of all the value you've given to me over the years.
Yeah.
And so it's like, again, you can't build shit products, you know what I mean? Or else people are going to stop ordering them. It's not going to work out long term. But most companies, if they could guarantee a certain number of orders up front, if their like product development is tight and on point, that's all they really need. They just need that initial group of people to come in, buy the stuff and be like, hey, this is awesome, or you should fix this or change this. And if you do, we'll buy more of it. You know what I mean? Like having that in your back pocket to launch anything. And I watched this guy. He built that was his first physical product. He had launched 1 or 2 different like small software products, several info products. And every time, man, he would just crank in hundreds of thousands of dollars in profit with no money spent in marketing because he had an army of true fans. Now multiply that to the nth degree and you have the examples of The Rock and Terramana Tequila. The Rock will make more money in tequila. I've said this a bunch of times. He'll make more money in tequila than he will on all of his active income from his entire career combined.
Isn't that wild? That is freaking wild.
It's insane, especially because he's the highest paid actor for quite a while. It's not like he's a B-list guy. You know what I mean? Like he's been making a lot of money actively for several years now. But it doesn't matter. It just doesn't even compare to how much he's going to make on the tequila company. They sold 3, I'm going to mess up all the numbers. They sold hundreds of thousands of cases their first year. Which was the most successful launch of any spirits company in history, not just tequila company, any spirits company in history. And when you compare that to Casamigos, so Casamigos was George Clooney's tequila company, he sold that company for over $1 billion. And the year that they sold, I want to say they sold 180,000 cases. The Rock last year, they sold over 1 million cases. So if you like do some quick math on that, if it's a 5x and then you take straight over to 5x enterprise value on the valuation of $1 billion, it's like, well, Terramana's estimate probably somewhere between $4 billion and $6 billion. And I don't know how much of that company The Rock owns, but guessing it's probably a fair chunk of equity that he has in that company. And that's just one of his companies. Zoa Energy was the fastest growing energy drink in the country the year that it launched. He's got this Project Rock with Under Armour. Every time he drops a new freaking pair of shoes, it sells out in an hour. You know what I mean? Like the Under Armour site crashes. Why? Because he has an army of true fans. Logan Paul, KSI launched Prime. It's like one of the most competitive industries out there is like the beverage space. It's owned by Gatorade, Coca-Cola, these massive legacy brands that have been around for decades. They own that space, and anybody that comes in that space either gets smacked by them or gets acquired by them within a relatively short period of time. Prime comes in, and their first year they did $250 million in sales. Last year, 2023, they did over $1.2 billion in revenue. Competing with freaking Gatorade and Powerade. And like I said, these brands have been around forever. And that was their second year in business. Why? Like they're not, it's not like they're savant business people or entrepreneurs. You know what I mean? They're not, savage CEOs with Harvard MBAs. Like they're YouTubers. That's
right.
it.
It's about the personal brand that they
built. Had a distribution engine built in. So there's an entire line item in all of those other companies. They have an entire line item called marketing in their P&L. And marketing is probably going to cost them anywhere from 20 to 40% of their entire gross revenue. So like you take gross revenue, subtract marketing, it's like, man, well, there goes 20%, 25% of our margin. Prime spent $0 on marketing. 0, which means they get more money to either put in their pockets or to invest in infrastructure, to invest in logistics and shipping, to invest in a smarter executive team that can run that company really well and take it to the moon. Like they can take that money and throw it into what they've been doing a lot of is like these brand deals where they're the official, hydration beverage of the UFC. They're the official hydration beverage of the Los Angeles Lakers. They're the official hydration beverage of like 3 or 4 Premier League teams over in the UK. Like they're using their marketing dollars to go buy more brand, because they don't have to use it to like put an ad on television, because they get it for free on all the stuff that they do. So like build an army of true fans, man. Like you never have to worry about, where your next customer is going to come from. All you got to worry about is building really good product, because if you build good product, you're going to get those initial orders. And then if those people come back, then you have a business, which is obviously what Prime has done. 1.2 billion in freaking sales in their second year in a insanely competitive and highly expensive category to compete in. Like beverages is just, it's insane.
Yeah, listen,
And
army of
and
true
there's so many more
fans.
examples where that came from.
For
Anywhere
sure.
from like the one I gave of like SwitchPod doing $400,000 all the way up to 1.2 billion. Like there's a sour strips company that came out of nowhere that a friend of mine's brother started. He's a YouTuber, not even a massive audience, maybe like 250,000 subscribers or something. But for whatever reason, the sour strips hit. They got initial distribution with his audience, and then now they're all over the place. They're doing millions of dollars and selling sour strips. You know what I mean? There's Alpha Land, which is an entire creator-owned gym out of Austin, like a freaking 100,000 square foot warehouse gym. It's called Alpha Land. Then Alpha Elite is the merch brand that they have. So they have an entire Alpha Elite store inside of the Alpha Land center. And the merch brand started off the back of the personal brand, got distribution, blew up the merch brand, then turned into Alpha Land, which is this massive, like beautiful state-of-the-art gym facility that they have out in a warehouse in Austin. Just like there's so many examples. Look at Dude Perfect. Look at, you know what I mean? Like there's so many where you just like, they have a distribution engine, they have an audience, they have a bunch of people that already know, like, and trust them, and go like, hey, launch something and we'll buy it from you. And then they launch something and people buy it from them. Like Mr. Beast has his Feastables chocolate bars, and there's just countless examples anymore, man, where it's like, that's why I think that like every entrepreneur owes it to themselves to be building that in the meantime. It's like whatever you're working on, it's like you're not gonna be as big as Logan Paul. You know what I mean? Like only very, 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 very few people will ever get to that level. But can you be like my buddy Pat that I was talking about? It's like a couple 100,000 subs, can build a physical product that does a 500,000 in sales month one. Like, can you build stuff like that? Yeah, absolutely. It might take some time, but like, why not work on that in addition to whatever you're working on? Because like you can build 3 companies in the next 15 years, but your personal brand can be built alongside of each of those the whole time. It just gets easier to launch a new company, new concept, new idea, the bigger that audience gets over time. So that's why I always think it's just like, hey, it's a good use of time, man. Like even if it takes me the next 10, 15, 20 years to build a really good personal brand, like if I wake up and I'm 50 and I have an entire audience of people who love what I do and are willing to test whatever products or services I launch without a question, like it seems like a pretty good use of my time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, for sure. And Alpha Land sounds awesome. I got to check that out next time in Austin.
Yeah.
That sounds like a hell of a place. And like you said, WWE fans, when they go to the bar, they're ordering Terramana. They're not reviewing what's the best tequila. They're just ordering that one because it's associated with The Rock, and they watched The Rock win the WWE title, when they were 13 years old. And
Yep. Same
and
with Prime and Logan Paul in WWE.
that's true. Yeah, that's right. Logan Paul, I think I think he's a champion over there right now. I'm actually a bit of a wrestling fan myself. I kind of jump in and out these days, but last I saw that they did have a belt on him. So they must be showcasing his talent in some way. But yeah, absolutely. So obviously, building a personal brand, certainly worth our time. I guess the question is though, for someone out there who's maybe an entrepreneur, who knows what they're doing or what their product is, and they're looking to create content, they're looking to put out a newsletter, create a podcast, whatever it is, maybe all 3. Do you think it's really important that they pick a defined niche to start creating content in, or just start creating content and the niche will kind of find you?
Depends on the goal. Having a niche, whatever, is crucial if you want to build audience fast. The more generic you are, the more difficult it is going to be to build an audience. However, my experience was I built a niche in kind of the networking space called Build Your Network. That was my podcast for 5 years, 700 plus episodes that we did, Build Your Network. And eventually, bro, I just got so bored of the topic
Sure.
that I I just decided to break every rule that I tell people they have to follow. So that's why I say, like, it just depends on the goal. Cause now, like, my goal is more just to have great conversations with people that I find interesting. And I think the audience, my theory is anyway, like, doing this long enough, even if they are generic and broad, that I think people will just will start, flocking to my interview style, and will start caring a little bit less about the guest per se, and will care more just because they like how I interview people. That's the hypothesis anyway, but talk to me in a couple of years, I might be completely wrong. But yeah, so we rebranded from Build Your Network to Travis Makes Friends because I was getting so bored with it that I was going to quit. And I was like, I
Sure.
know for sure that you can't build an audience if you quit. So, like, I should probably just do the thing that I know I'm going to be willing to do for the next 5 years, even if nobody tunes in. And that's kind of why I did the rebrand and why I went more generic. But I also had at least a smaller, like, audience that was willing to follow me to that. I know I had some audience drop off and I lost some listeners because it stopped being like super entrepreneurial and super networking focused. But that it is what it is. And at the end of the day, like I said, if you quit, you're definitely not going to build an audience. So for me, I wasn't solving for like, what's my niche at that point. I was solving for, how do I keep my interest high in doing this for a longer period of time so that, I can still reap the benefits of gaining an audience.
Yeah, for sure. And, it's certain you've gone more broad with your conversations in your podcast now, but you did start with kind of a narrowed in niche for the first while there. And like you said, you were able to bring a bit of that audience over. There was some drop off. So, I think that, like you said, you can certainly go both ways. I think maybe in the beginning, being a little bit more niche down just to get in the flow of things and then build at least somewhat of an audience that you can bring over to a more broad conversation. It seems like it's worked pretty well for you.
Yeah. And to sorry to interrupt you, to be
Yeah,
clear, like, it's kind of a luxury to be able to do that, because at the beginning I would not have been able to do that. I had to speak about this niche because that's what like brought leads and customers into my business.
sure.
And I wouldn't have had anybody to sell anything to if I wasn't really niched down at the beginning. And I kind of had to do it like that. If I wanted to like go full time online with my like online business and stuff, which I was really desperately trying to do at the time. So I was still doing door-to-door sales when I started my podcast just to make money. So niching down, and like that trade was totally worth it for me, to just like, I'm going to talk about this one thing, I'm going to build this program on the back end, and then people that come in through this, they like the content and they'll jump on calls, and then they'll jump into this program, and that's how I'll make money. And it worked, you know what I mean? And I needed to do that. Now I get paid a salary for my company, so it's like less, I don't have to worry about food being put on my family's table,
Sure.
at this point. So I can kind of fulfill this curiosity itch on the podcast side.
Yeah, absolutely. And curious what your thought is on, so many people start podcasts and maybe they get through, I forget what the statistic is, most don't get through like 12 episodes, or maybe they get through a year of podcasts and then they kind of fade off into the distance. Why do you think it's so tough for people to stick with this specific avenue of content? And what advice would you give someone that maybe has had a show going for a year and a half, 2 years, they haven't seen the traction that they'd like to see, and what can they do to keep themselves motivated to keep going?
People don't do it because it's a lot of work for not a lot of return for quite some time. And most people can't, deal with that. And to be fair, it sucks. So like, I don't like blame
Right.
them for that. Some people just don't want it that bad. You know what I mean? Like when I started, I was like, I like doing this so much. Like, I'm just going to keep doing it. And I still feel that way. Like my podcast is good. Like, the audience I have now, I would have killed to have when I first started, obviously. But it's also not like enough to retire and just be a podcaster. So like of course I would like for that to happen, but I like doing it enough to where even if that doesn't happen, I still look at it as a good use of my time. And so that would be the thing I would say to most people, is just like, if you're about to start a show and your hope is that it goes viral and you have 1 million subscribers on YouTube in 6 months, just know that's probably not going to happen. And when that doesn't happen, you're going to have to make a decision. And that decision is going to be, do I keep going even though I wanted 1 million subs and I'm only at 612? Do I keep going after this? And so I tell people, if you're not willing to give it at least 2 years, really, I would say 3 years, 4 years, then it might not even be worth starting.
Yeah.
Because you probably won't get the results that you're looking for. But I also know, like, everybody's different. I'm that way. When I started, I committed to 2 years, 2 years, 3 episodes a week, no excuses. I'm getting it done. And I went through a lot of, there was a lot of personal life stuff that was happening in the background, a lot of relationship stuff that was happening in the background. We were moving, we were changing careers, jobs, so many things were happening in the background, but I never missed an episode, 3 a week for 2 years. And it was like, once that happened, then I was like, okay, if I do this for 3 weeks for 2 years and I don't get anything from it, then at that point I can quit, or I can adjust or rebrand or do something different. But I got to give it time to let it do its thing and trust that something's going to happen. And then, like I said, for me now, it's like, we just started on YouTube last year, so we're kind of like starting over in a way.
Sure.
It was a dumb decision. I should have put my Zoom interviews on YouTube, but I just had a mental aversion to it. And so at the beginning of 2023, when we rebranded Travis Makes Friends, we started doing everything on YouTube as well. And so we kind of, like I said, we're starting over. So, we're sitting at 5,000 subscribers on YouTube. So it was a bummer to literally start from scratch. We'll still release our episodes over there. They get 60 views, but there's also been some flashes in the pan where it's like, oh, this interview got 160,000 views. This interview got 50,000 views. This interview got 35,000 views, and it's like, well, there's some encouragement there. And I know that things take time, and anything good will always take time. And so I look at it as look, if I can just grow 10% per month on YouTube, then in 5 years, I'll have 1 million subscribers, 10% a month. That's all I got to do. Says not give up, 10% a month, 5 years, 1 million subscribers. And that's it. You know what I mean? So I know that it's just going to take time. But the thing is, again, even if it takes the full 5 years to get there, or maybe even a little bit longer than that, I still view having a channel with 1 million subscribers as being worth the effort that I'm putting into getting there, even if it does take me another 5 years to get there.
Yeah, for sure. And, I think it's one thing that you were doing, 3 episodes per week, which is, a hell of a cadence that most podcasters will never even attempt. So just putting in those 3 episodes a week, just think of the reps that you were getting so much quicker than most podcasters get. I mean, to get to that many episodes, most podcasters never get past an episode a week. And even that cadence, they kind of struggle to keep up with. So I think just the 3 a week probably just escalated your interviewing skills at a much higher rate than I would say your average podcaster.
It escalates
enhances
everything.
their abilities.
Yeah, everything. Your ability, your skills, sure, but also your download numbers. Your monthly downloads are triple just because you're releasing 3 a week instead of 1.
Right.
Sometimes it's just simple math. It's well, how do I double my downloads? It's double your releases.
Right. Do more. More output equals more results for sure.
Right. There's diminishing returns at some point. So usually when I coach people, I try to convince them to do 2 a week, because I'm the additional reward that you get from going from 1 to 2 is double. 2 to 3 is 33%. 3 to 4 is 25%. You know what I mean? So it starts diminishing with every additional episode you add in on a weekly basis, but go from 1 to 2 if you can, just because the additional reps that you get, the additional downloads that you get, the additional connections that you get, the momentum that you get. There's so many reasons to do it like that. And just batch, man. When I was doing that many interviews, 12 interviews a month, I would just batch, do 2 days a month. The first Tuesday, Wednesday of every month, I would do 5-6 interviews each day. And then that was my full month calendar. I maybe would sprinkle in a couple through the rest of the month, but for the most part, it was 2 days a month I'm interviewing, and that's it. So it wasn't crazy taxing. And frankly, those days were fun. They drain your energy to having that many conversations, but
for sure.
But still fun though. And, I'd get done with the day and be like, what a cool day. All I did was talk to people that I find interesting for 6 hours.
Right.
It's not a bad way to make a living. You know what I mean?
No,
but yeah, so what I would say to people who are in that pod fade phase where it's man, this was cool and now it's a pain, just look at the other reasons to have a show and ask yourself, if the audience never gets to where you want it to be, will you find your time that you spent doing the show to be valuable still? And if the answer is yes, then keep doing it. So like that was always the answer for me, man. It's like the other reasons to podcast, gaining knowledge. That's like one huge thing in two different ways, by the way. For me, like gaining knowledge means like as an interviewer, I gain knowledge because I talk to crazy, knowledgeable, smart, wise people on my podcast all the time. And I get to ask them, I get to download information from their brain that I'm curious about learning. And when I learn that way, the information tends to stick with me much better than when I learn it a different way. So I'm gaining knowledge directly from the people I'm interviewing, yes, but also like I'm reading books, I'm keeping up with newsletters, I'm listening to other podcasts, I'm trying to keep up with industry practices. Like I feel like a sense of accountability to my audience for bringing them the best information that I can give to them, and that requires me to be constantly learning new information all the time. So like knowledge and information gain has been like really huge for me. Just from the accountability perspective, I feel accountable to my audience to do that. And then from the people that I learn from. So there's knowledge from that side. And then there's the skill uh, uh, um, acquisition of communication that's been extremely helpful in so many areas. Like asking questions is, like we talked about earlier, is not just helpful as a podcast interview. Of course it is, but it is also very helpful in everyday life, even in conversations with my spouse, with my kids, with my friends, with random people that I meet at a bar or at a conference or whatever. Asking questions, the ability to draw conversation from people that are in like an awkward situation and make people feel good about themselves and like bring a spotlight over to them, like that ability will take you, will put you in rooms you never thought you could get into. Just having that, you know what I mean? So like there's sometimes I've been invited out to dinners or whatever, and people are going around, and I feel like like I said, I feel like I'm the dumbest one there. And I find myself in these types of rooms all the time. And one of my buddies was introducing me at this room because like a couple guys didn't know who I was, and my buddy was introducing me. He's like, "Oh yeah, this is Travis." He's like, he said something like, literally anybody who I know who knows Travis never has anything bad to say about him. If you don't like Travis, that tells me more something about you than it tells me about him. And like I was like, man, wow, that's a great intro. Thank you very much for saying that. But it is like, that was not like, oh, that's just who I am. That's like, I think that's a skill that's been not perfected, but has improved dramatically over doing the show for so long. Because it teaches you to shine the spotlight on other people. And if you can effectively do that in a way that's very genuine and authentic, like I said before, it has to be genuine to who you are. And that's how I feel about it. It's like, I'm just a genuinely curious, empathetic person. And the show has made me way more that way. And when you're that type of person, you find yourself just getting invited to stuff like that because people like having that type of energy around, if that makes sense. So the communication skills have been, obviously I have still a lot of things to learn about all of that, but I would be so far behind if I, hadn't had hundreds of conversations with some of the brightest people in the world on my show at this point. Then the connections, dude. I mean, that I can never say enough about this one because I just the people I've been able to talk to that I've like connected with, the people that actually text me back when I text them or message them or whatever, like it's just insane. I just never thought that those people would give me the time of day, let alone sit down, have a conversation with me, and then be willing to be friends afterwards. Right. You know what I mean? Like I just wasn't expecting any of that stuff to happen. So the connections, the network, like almost everybody I know now is like a connection that came from interviewing them on the podcast, from somebody I talked to on the podcast, from somebody that I found through a guest on the podcast. Like it's been like the source of completely reconstructing my whole friend groups from the last, 8-9 years after I left the world that I grew up in. So and those are just a few of the things, man. Knowledge, communication skills, networking. There's so many reasons to have a show other than getting downloads and building an audience. So to me, it's like, if you can focus on those things and just treat the audience like the cherry on top, then you'll never quit. And if you never quit, you're going to gain an audience. I don't know how big that audience is going to be, and I don't know how long it's going to take, but you will get one. You know what I mean? So focus on the other stuff that matters as well.
Yeah, for sure. And I love that analogy of shining the spotlight on others. And I think we can kind of think of conversation in that sense. And we always want to shine the spotlight on the person we're with a little bit more than we're shining it on ourselves, right? There's two types of people that you can have lunch with. There's one that tells you stories about their life and how amazing everything they're doing is. And you leave that lunch thinking they're the most interesting person on the planet. And then there's the other one who asks you questions, shines the spotlight on you, listens intently, and you leave that lunch thinking that you're the most interesting person on the planet. And to me, I think there's a lot more value in being person number two, and hosting a podcast kind of really teaches you and forces you to be more of that person number two than person number one.
Absolutely.
So I love how you talked about kind of time blocking your shows, and we're going to wrap up here pretty quickly, but you're obviously a guy that values his time and uses his time well. So I'm just kind of curious, what does your average day look like these days?
Yeah, right now we're up around 6:30. We by way I'm saying me and my wife. Our daughter is in preschool. She goes there by 7, but since this and our son is going into kindergarten, but it's the summer, so he's not in kindergarten right now. So we take our daughter to preschool at 7, and then we go to the gym, work out for a couple of hours. Put our son goes into daycare at the gym. And then once we are done with the gym, we come home, and then I start with calls, just like this one, podcast interviews, sales calls for my agency, leadership calls with my team, stuff like that. And then I typically do that for 3 to 5 hours. If I can squeeze in lunch, I do. A lot of times, honestly, I fast till dinner, and then make sure I drink plenty of electrolytes throughout the day. Drink a couple protein shakes throughout the day. And then at maybe whenever my calls are over, so 4:00, 5:00, whenever my last call is, typically after that, we go for a walk in the evenings with the whole family, or I'll go by myself and take my dog, and then come back, have some dinner, put the kids down, and me and my wife hang out for a little bit, and then go to sleep early and do the whole thing again.
I love it, man. And it's so funny how high performers all operate in different ways, right? Like you get up, you start your day with family, and then it's work next. And then you've got some other guys that say you got to get up and you got to start working at 6 a.m. And then do the family stuff later on. So I think it is interesting how we all kind of work in different ways. And we've just got to find those areas in our day where we are at peak performance and utilize those. And it's going to be a little bit different for everybody.
And it comes in phases too, man. Like I'm a big believer that you got to keep a pulse on like what's working now and why is it working now, and recognize that it may not be working in 3 months from now. Like our schedules have adjusted, a lot, and having kids kind of forces you into that. But man, for a long time, I was getting up at 4 a.m. My wife was up at 5 a.m. I would go directly to the gym, come back, so that she could go to the gym, so that somebody's at home with the kids before our daughter could be at the daycare at the gym. Our son would go drop him off at preschool or whatever. It was like, we've always been willing to just move, adjust, be flexible based on the time of life, the season of life. For a while, it's like fitness was like my number one priority. So we built our schedule around the gym. For another season, it's like, well, the business is the number one priority. So we build the schedule around the business. It's like, oh, now the kids are like, in a really fun phase right now that's going to be over soon. We build the schedule around the kids. It's just like, you got to be willing to be flexible, and you got to understand too that, like, I'm on the same page as Alex Hormozy is with this one, where with morning routines and stuff. Because that used to be a question I asked every guest that came on my show: what's your morning routine look like? Sure. I got a bunch of really good answers for it, but also it's really just whatever works. And sometimes if you have too rigid of a routine that you want to go through, it can actually be more taxing and give you more anxiety than be helpful. Cause you're like, oh man, you feel guilty because you missed your meditation, or because you didn't write your affirmations, or you didn't journal, or you didn't, do the cold plunge, or like whatever the arbitrary list of things that you think you need to accomplish in order to be productive for the day is. If you make yourself do that all the time, it's like, man, it can actually be detrimental, because it prevents you from getting real work done that needs to get done. And it's just kind of mentally, this masturbatory exercise that like makes you feel good about the self-help portion of yourself, but also prevents you from actually being productive and makes you more anxious about doing stuff that's not productive for the sake of being more productive, but maybe later, like, you know what I mean? So you can't get too bogged down. You got to be willing to be flexible. You got to like move things in, take things out. But be intentional, be clear. But also like if you get way too rigid with that stuff, man, I think it can actually hurt more than it can help.
Right. Yeah. Like if I don't get, 10 minutes of sunlight in my eyes, followed by my sauna and my steam bath and my ice plunge and my 10-minute meditation
Right.
and my 15 minutes of affirmations, then I'm useless. And I might as well just call this day a zero
Exactly.
and we'll get back at it tomorrow.
You get in your head, man. Yeah, exactly. That's total. You feel like it's a momentum killer. You know what I mean? It's like, well, I didn't do those things, so today can't be productive now. You know what I mean? And it's like, whoa, 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 whoa. If you would have just gotten up and been productive and done all this other shit at 3 p.m., you
Sure.
probably would have had a better day. You know what I mean? Like, or tried to fit it in throughout the day, or like didn't do it at all. You probably still would have had. You know what I mean? Like, so I'm way more bullish on those things. Like, if you're gonna do any of the morning things, like do a journal and just write the 3 things down that you got to get done every day. One of them being the one thing. If you could do 0 other things, what's the one thing you have to get done today? Do that thing first, and then have 2 other like big projects that will move the needle, and do those. If you do those, like most people are way too busy, quote unquote busy. They work 12-hour days. And then you look at like the things that have actually been accomplished over 30-day period. It's like, what were you doing during those 12? Like, how are you working this much? What are you spending your time on? You know what I mean? Like, realistically, most people, man, the one thing by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan, the book is a great book to read, to reframe yourself into thinking about, like, I don't need to accomplish a list of 37 things. I need to do one thing that I am uniquely and specially qualified to do. If I can move the needle on this one thing, and then I have a couple other projects that I can work on if I have time. Cool. 1, 2, 3. Do those 3 things. Then I have like, what I do is I just have a running list of kind of like to-do tasks that are in the background. They're not urgent. They're not something I need to get accomplished, but it's like, if I feel productive and I'm in a good productivity space and I've already accomplished the major things I need to accomplish today, then let's start rolling through some of these other things. You know what I mean? But man, so many people just, they buy into the lie that you have to hustle 16 hours a day in order to be productive. And it's just so far from being true. It's crazy.
Love that. Separate the important from the urgent. Knock out those 3 needle moving tasks per day, and you'll be a lot farther 90 days from today than otherwise. Travis, dude, you brought it today. I really appreciate your time. Where can everyone keep up with what you got going on these days?
Oh man, podcasts. I'm always grateful for people to check out the podcast. It's Travis Makes Friends on anywhere you listen to podcasts. But like I said, we're playing catch up on YouTube. So if you're a YouTube watcher out there, YouTube user, then go to @Travis Makes Friends on YouTube and give us a subscription. Check out some of the episodes over there, because we're doing, the majority of them are completely in person. Try to make them more visually interesting. We try our best to do a really good job and bring the best content that we possibly can. So it would mean the world to me if you go check that out.
Awesome stuff, Trav. Thank you for being here, guys. This has been Persistence Playbook, and we will catch you on the next one. Travis, thank you.